week we're discussing the Devil Tree, which was suggested by Melinda. On the surface, the Devil Tree, which is located in Port St. Lucie, Florida, in Oak Hammock Park, is just a common oak tree that has stood firmly for 150 years or so. But it is anything but ordinary. This tree is rumored to be the site of paranormal and occultist activity due to the crimes of one man. Gerard John Shaefer created the horrible history behind the tree when he chose it to be his killing and burial grounds for his victims. Shaefer is considered the first serial killer in Florida history, despite only being officially charged with 2 murders. So not only will we be discussing the hauntings, but the lore creating a little true crime paranormal crossover. I invite you to join me as we discuss the strange yet sad history behind Florida's Devil Tree.
I buy the same products you do, only I get them much cheaper. I save hundreds of dollars a month by doing this one simple trick that I'm about to show you. Don't spend another dime shopping online until you watch.
On March 26, 1946, Gerard John Shaefer Jr. was born in Wisconsin to his parents Gerard and Doris Marie Shaefer. He was the oldest of 3 children. Shortly after his birth, the family moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where he was raised for a good portion of his childhood. After his siblings came along, Gerard and his father's relationship began to falter. His father was an alcoholic who used Gerard exclusively as his punching bag. Gerard felt he received the brunt of mistreatment, especially when it came to his sister. His father chose to dote on her, which made Gerard hate the fact that he was born a man, causing him to develop gender dysphoria. He hated himself for being the disappointment of the family. Around the age of 12, Gerard got into some strange new hobbies, which included bondage, cross-dressing, and killing animals. This new interest in sadomasochism and bondage led him to start tying himself up to trees in order to inflict pain. By 1960, the Shaefers moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He attended St. Thomas Aquinas High School, which he graduated from in 1964, then went on to college at Florida Atlantic University, where he pursued a variety of degrees. Despite going to college, Gerard didn't find his calling until 1966. He was always raised in a Catholic household and felt he could make a difference by joining the priesthood, but this pursuit was short-lived. He was rejected from entering priesthood due to a lack of faith, and in response, Gerard renounced the entire Catholic religion. So instead, he chose to pursue a career in teaching, hoping to instill American values into the youth. But this endeavor ended as soon as it started due to his inappropriate behavior. His supervisor felt Gerard was imposing his own moral and political values on the students rather than biasly teaching the curriculum. Teaching was now out of the question. Gerard began searching for the pursuit of happiness when he met Martha Fogg. The pair fell for each other and tied the knot in 1968, but much like anything else he tried to do, this fell through. Martha filed for divorce in 1970, claiming Gerard was extremely cruel to her. It wasn't long before Gerard was back in the dating scene when he met wife number 2. Teresa Dean and Gerard saw each other for a few months before marrying in 1971. Since Gerard couldn't be a priest or a teacher, he decided on trying law enforcement instead. He was turned down by several agencies before being picked up by a small police department called Wilton Manors in 1971. Gerard was fired after being with the Wilton Manors Police Department less than a year. He was using police databases to obtain female traffic violators' personal information in order to contact them and ask them on dates. Without a job once more and unable to gain employment with any of the local law enforcement agencies, Gerard decided to apply for a job with Martin County Sheriff's Department in nearby Stuart, Florida. He was employed with the department for less than a month before he would make a big mistake. One that would not only cost him his career, but his freedom as well. On July 21, 1972, while out patrolling, Gerard happens upon 2 teenage girls, 17-year-old Pamela Wells and 18-year-old Nancy Trotter. The girls were hitchhiking along the highway near the local beach when he stopped them. Gerard falsely told the youths that hitchhiking in Martin County was illegal and offered them a ride back to where they were staying. Rather than have the women break the law, Gerard offered to drive them to the beach the following morning when he would be off duty. But when the next day arrived, plans quickly changed. He drove the girls to a swampy area known as Hutchinson Island at the time, located off State Road A1A. Gerard held them at gunpoint, threatening to kill or sell them into prostitution if they made a move. Both of the girls were forced out of the car and taken to the area where the Devil's Tree stands. It was here he tied them up to the tree, but before he could go any further, a call came through on his radio. He had an emergency he had to attend to and left the girls there, but promised he would return as soon as possible. This was the golden opportunity. During his absence, the girls managed to wriggle free of their bindings. They ran to the nearby highway where, as luck would have it, a passing police car picked the girls up. Gerard returns to finish the job but finds his victims are long gone. So acting out of desperation, he calls his sheriff, Richard Crowder. He tells the sheriff he has, quote, done something foolish, unquote, and stated he was going to be very mad with him. Gerard explains to his superior he was trying to teach a pair of girls a lesson. He wanted to scare them into never hitchhiking again for their own good. He states he was overdoing his job by ensuring these girls were safe in the future. Of course, no one would believe such a tale, and Gerard was fired immediately and arrested on the charges of false imprisonment and 2 counts of aggravated assault. He was eventually released on a $15,000 bond. The trial for these charges took place in November of 1972. He pled guilty to 1 count of assault while all other charges were dropped through a plea deal. He was sentenced to 1 year in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. His sentence officially started in 1973. However, while awaiting trial, some very peculiar things happened. On September 27, 1972, 17-year-old Susan Place and 16-year-old Georgia Jessup vanished from Fort Lauderdale. Susan's mother explained the girls were last seen at their house before leaving with an older-looking man named Jerry Shepard. They were going to play guitar at the nearby beach, and her mother didn't think too much of it until the girls never returned. She did her due diligence, though. She notated the license plate number and took a good description of the car, which was a blue-green Datsun. The license plate number provided was traced back to Gerard Shaefer, who at the time was gearing up for his first incarceration. Gerard was questioned about these other 2 women, but denied any kind of involvement. On April 1, 1973, skeletal remains were found on Hutchinson Island by men collecting cans. Through dental records, police were able to identify them as the missing girls, Susan and Georgia. Both sets of remains showed signs of being tied and essentially butchered. This wasn't a coincidence. Police were sure based on method and location, they had enough to secure a search warrant for Gerard's home, which he shared with his mother and wife. On April 7th, police searched the home to recover a stash of women's jewelry, 100 pages of writing and sketches depicting mutilations and murders of young women, along with pieces of identification belonging to another 2 missing hitchhikers, Colette Goodenough and Barbara Wilcox, who were both 19 at the time of their disappearance. The 2 girls were last seen alive on January 8, 1973, a week before Shaefer was sent to jail for his assault charges. Their skeletal remains were found in early 1977 when their bones began to protrude from the ground beneath the Devil Tree, but no cause of death could be determined, so no charges were filed against him. Another clipping referred to the February 1969 disappearance of waitress Carmen Halleck, who was seemingly abducted from her home. Along with the news clipping, jewelry and a gold-filled tooth were identified as belonging to her, too. Pieces of jewelry belonging to Lee Handlines Bonadines, who disappeared in September of 1969, was also discovered. She was Gerard's neighbor when he was a teenager. Her skeletal remains were finally recovered in 1978, but due to not being able to determine cause of death, he received no charges. Lastly, more jewelry was recovered, which linked him to the disappearance of 14-year-old Maria Briscolina and 13-year-old Elise Farmer, who disappeared from Broward County in October of 1972. Their skeletal remains were also discovered in early 1973, but with the lack of cause of death, it could not be proved he murdered them. The suspected victims list grew and grew, with investigators believing he could be responsible for 30 missing persons. Despite suspicion and circumstantial evidence, investigators could only definitively charge him with 2 counts of murder. On May 18, 1973, Gerard was indicted for the slayings of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup. In October of the same year, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and received 2 life sentences. Gerard tried numerous appeals, close to 20, but all were rejected. After rejected appeals, he tried to send numerous lawsuits to true crime writers who called him a serial killer. However, these 2 were tossed out. The courts felt he was in fact branded a serial killer due to him being undeniably linked to many murders beyond the 2 he was convicted for. On December 3, 1995, Gerard Shaefer was found dead in his cell. Reportedly, another inmate named Vincent Rivera barged into the cell and murdered him. He revealed no particular motive, but in 1999, he received an additional 53 years on top of his life plus 20-year sentence for a double murder he committed in Tampa. It was believed his death was likely due to Gerard becoming an informant, since seemingly confidential information regarding other inmate crimes always seemed to end up in the prosecutor's lap. Gerard Shaefer was suspected of killing dozens of young women across South Florida, and unfortunately for the families of these victims, the truth of what happened to their loved ones died with him. Officially, police believe Gerard is responsible for the deaths of these women and girls. Nancy Leichner, age 21, Pamela Nader, age 20. The women disappeared in 1966 from Ocala National Forest. Their remains have not been recovered. Lee Hanlon Bonadies disappeared on September 8, 1969. Her remains were discovered in 1978 and later identified in 2004. Carmen Marie Halleck, aged 22, disappeared on December 18, 1969 from Broward County. Her remains have never been discovered. Belinda Hutchins, aged 22, disappeared on January 5, 1972. Her remains have never been discovered. Peggy Rand, aged 9, and Wendy Stevenson, aged 8. The girls went missing on December 29, 1970 from Pompano Beach. Susan Place, aged 17, and Georgia Jessup, aged 16. The girls disappeared on September 27, 1972 from Fort Lauderdale. Their remains were discovered on April 1, 1973. Mary Alice Briscolina, aged 14, and Elsie Lena Farmer, aged 14. The girls disappeared on January 17, 1973 from Pompano Beach. Mary's remains were discovered on February 15, 1973, while Elsie's were discovered on January 17, 1973. Colette Goodenough, aged 19, and Barbara Ann Wilcox, aged 19. The girls disappeared in early January 1973. Both of their remains were discovered in January of 1977. Since the death of Gerard Shaefer and the discovery of his devil tree, the area has become a place of legends. Before Hammock Park was created, several attempts were made to cut down the old oak with the dark past, but all were unsuccessful. Anytime chainsaws were brought near the tree, they would unexpectedly stop working. Park officials attempted to chop it down with a 2-man cross cut saw, but all of the teeth fell out of the blade. Regular axes have also been tried, but after one cut, the axe heads come off the handle. The marks of the attempted removal can still be seen as the tree stands proudly in a small open area of the park.